Paul Bernstein, MD, is a practicing head and neck surgeon, chair of the Head and Neck Division of the American Society, and founder of the Kaiser Permanente Historical Society. His novels have won awards at the San Diego Book Awards and the Asiloma Writers Conference, and Dr. Bernstein has appeared as a medical expert on Good Morning America. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's a pleasure to have Paul Bernstein, the author of Courage to Heal, that I recently reviewed on the channel on the show. Welcome on the show, Paul.
Thanks, Peter. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's very wholesome to have you on the show. I haven't read your amazing book. I love it so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Paul, you've written an amazing novel based on the real life story of Dr. Sidney Garfield. Tell us, why have you chosen to write particularly about Sidney Garfield? Why not about other American surgeons at the time of Sidney Garfield? What inspired Courage to Heal particularly?
Thanks, Peter. Sidney Garfield was a unique surgeon in American history that not that many people know about. So I found it really exciting to write about a person that did so much to change American medicine. And what he did was, starting way back in the 1930s, he looked at the way we provide medicine to our patients, which was and still is to a large part what's called fee for service, meaning that the sicker the patient is, the more money the doctor makes. And he thought, well, that really doesn't make sense. Shouldn't the doctor and the patient be on the same side of the equation, meaning the healthier the patient is, the more the doctor makes? So he really started what's called preventive care, preventive medicine in America by starting to do what's called prepaid medicine, where the patient paid the doctor to keep them healthy. At the same time, he didn't stop there. He was an amazing innovator. So he did things that changed medicine from looking at ways to reach out to large populations of patients. So in America, like every country around the world, there's a lot of healthcare inequality. He looked at a way of reaching out to all his patients. And to do that, he was the first one to use computers in medicine. They got a grant from the United States government to use the first IBM computers when they were still using those punch cards.
Yeah.
And he was able to reach out to patients and do preventive testing, where they would do blood tests, urine tests, etc., and know whether or not the patient had any indications that they needed further workup. In addition to being one of the first to use computers in medicine, he was one that coined the term wellness. So we all think, oh yeah, it was Deepak Chopra that started talking about wellness, but it was really Sidney Garfield came up with the term wellness. And then just to put things, the last thing I'm going to mention is he also was the first one to use the word telehealth. So we've all lived through COVID, and it was really Sidney Garfield that thought about telehealth and calling patients and having patients call the doctor to really provide the care that you can get when you can't come in to see the doctor in person. So that's why, Peter, it was really exciting to write about Sidney Garfield, because he did so much to change the way we practice medicine in America today.
That's quite amazing to know. That's quite exciting to know, because I do love it actually while I read through the book myself. And now I would love to ask you, as an head and neck surgeon yourself, do you have some trait that you specifically admire about Sidney Garfield that interests you to, more to write a novel about him?
Sure. Not only was he a great surgeon that I found inspiring, he also was what we call patient-centered, patient-focused. He really cared about his patients. An example of that was, as in the book, he was the first one in America to actually air condition a hospital where the patients were. So prior to Sidney Garfield, no hospital in America, not Johns Hopkins back east, nothing, had air conditioning in the patient care areas. They actually had air conditioning in the doctor's offices, but not in the patient care areas. And that's because Sidney Garfield really focused on the well-being and health of his patients, which I really admire, in terms of what he does, what he did. And then is also I admire his focus on innovation. He was never one just to keep doing the same old. He was always one that liked to look at how we can do things better. And particularly, how can we make healthcare affordable so that the average person could actually get high quality healthcare? And I
Yeah.
really admire the way that Sidney Garfield did that.
That's amazing. That's quite amazing to know. It's lovely to know some trait that I specifically admire about him. Now, Paul, let's talk about your writing style. I must admit that reading the book was quite enthralling to me, from the prologue section to the wonderful plot and characterization. And of course, anyone who reads Courage to Heal must have sensed that this must have been written by a medical doctor. I'm particularly intrigued by your craft, your writing style, the description of the surgery, the conversation between the doctors, the scenes, everything reads medically scenic in a way that you can, paint image in your head and as you read along. And just like I said in my review, it reminds me of the Grey's Anatomy movie that I watched many years ago. Now, apart from being a doctor, were you professionally trained in writing?
Great question. So I wasn't professionally trained, but I did go, and I still do go to what are called read and critique groups. So I think it's really important for a new writer not to write alone, because we learn how to write essays and things in school, but we really don't learn how to write as a novelist or as a writer in terms of what a point of view is. How do you write dialogue? How do you provide good characterization? And those are the things that you can learn by being in groups where you discuss your writing, and then you continually improve by the critique of others that are better writers. And so I did that for 10 years. I also had the unique advantage that my wife, who you interviewed on your podcast, who is an amazing writer, Judy Bernstein, also was very helpful in terms of guiding me to become a better writer. And she's written, as you, I think, talked to her about, Disturbed in Their Nests and They Poured Fire in the Sky. Little plug for her. And so I think it's good to surround yourself with other writers and to learn, how to write and continuously improve by doing this. Now, the other thing is to write what you know. Like you mentioned, it sounded kind of like Grey's Anatomy, because Grey's Anatomy was written by doctors, the screenplay for the different TV shows. And same for Courage to Heal. Being a surgeon, I was able to capture what Sidney Garfield was actually feeling and how he would talk and what it was like in the OR. At the same time, it's good to go out to your sources. And he was still alive at the time I wrote the novel, and I was able to reach out to him when he was 96 and talk to him. Even though it's a novel, he writes in the foreword that it captures the true spirit of what they all lived through. So you want to make your writing authentic, and you want to reach out to new sources to really make sure that you're capturing the spirit of the story that you want to tell.
Wow, that's quite amazing to know. And just like I said previously, I typically love your writing style entirely throughout the book. It reads
Thanks,
very
Peter.
amazingly. And, at some point I was like, oh yeah, I know about this. I remember you mentioned in a place you talked about seeding, having the old donor and some other things encapsulated in it, the surgery on the woman with kidney issue, and more things. The conversation between the doctors are quite educative for whoever is going to study medicine. It's something that I really recommend to medicine students, I would say. Yeah, so that's an amazing one. Now, I know that writing sometimes can be challenging. I'm curious to know if you experienced any challenges while writing Courage to Heal. If there is any, could you share with us what challenge it is and how you ultimately overcame it?
So I think that's a great point. Writers have to persevere. So one thing about writing, and this has been written in multiple writing books, even Stephen King on writing and others that write about how do you finish a novel. It's all about perseverance.
Yeah.
It's a marathon, not a sprint, as you know, Peter, because you're a writer. It's really about setting time aside every day where you're going to write. And when I wrote Courage to Heal, it took 3 years to write it because I was doing it. I was a full-time surgeon. I had a family and a new son who was relatively young. So I basically found time late at night to write for at least an hour a day. And that's all you have to do. If you can just accomplish about 8 to 10 pages a week,
Yeah.
then a novelist or a writer can basically finish a book in less than a year.
Mm.
And so that's the key, is just really to focus time that you're going to write and stick to it. So set a goal for yourself each week and accomplish that goal by writing a certain number of pages. And I think that also keeps you engaged in your story. And I think if
Absolutely.
you wait too long and you only write like one day a week, you're not as engaged, because it's not only the writing time that makes for a good book, it's also
Yeah,
you're thinking about it. So in your spare time,
absolutely.
you're thinking about what you're going to write during the time that you're allocating to write each day.
Absolutely. That's great. I love your thought about that. That's very true. I can relate to it as well. Now, Paul, reading through Courage to Heal, it is obvious that Dr. Garfield's style of medicine is different from that of his contemporaries. He loves to practice a medical system where preventive care will be available for all, and he chooses the preventive care techniques over the fee-for-service type of medicine. I'm curious to know if Garfield's system of medicine still exists today. I'm asking because, as to what I know in my country and most part of Africa, the fee for service is a type that is widely practiced. What do you have to say about this?
So I'm a strong believer in Garfield's practice, the way that he practiced medicine, namely preventive care and
Mm.
prepaid medicine. And I've been part of Kaiser Permanente, which Sidney
Oh,
Garfield and Henry Kaiser started back in 1945. So I've been part of
wow.
Kaiser Permanente for over 40 years. And that's that system of medicine that Sidney Garfield and Henry Kaiser started at the end of World War II is still in existence today and has grown
Mm.
significantly. So right now, Kaiser Permanente in America has over 12.5 million members,
Wow.
and we have over 24,000 doctors and 300,000 nurses and employees. So we've
Wow.
grown significantly since Garfield and Kaiser started us back in the 1940s. And
Mm.
now we're in different parts of America. We're everywhere from Hawaii to Washington, D.C. to Georgia. There are Kaiser Permanentes providing care for our patients, and with the same model of not fee for service, where the patient and the
Wow.
doctor really are on different sides of the equation. It's really, like we mentioned earlier, it's about the doctor being paid more to keep you healthy. And at the same time, it's about affordability and quality. And that's what
Mm.
Kaiser Permanente has done. And just by chance, 2 days ago was our Kaiser Permanente anniversary.
Oh,
July 17th was our anniversary. So now we've been around for 78 years as
wow.
far as providing care to our patients.
Wow, that's quite impressive to know. I love that. I'm quite excited to know about that. That's one of the importance of interviewing authors after reading their books. It's actually
And
to
then
have
speaking about,
much.
yeah, and speaking about where you live, we have traveled around the world,
Mm.
to different countries from England to Singapore to others that have been interested in our style of practice. And so we are trying, and we have an international group that
Wow.
basically tries to help other countries provide a similar system, because we're a uniquely integrated system in terms of the doctor and the insurance company and the pharmacy and the nurses all
Yeah.
being under one umbrella that allows
Mm.
us to provide very efficient and high quality care.
That's great. That's quite amazing to know. I love the sound of that. I really do love it. That's quite great to know. Now, I also
Thank you.
see that you have another book titled Flash Blind. Without giving much away, would you love to tell us a bit about the making of Flash Blind?
Yes, I would. And so let me change my background
Okay.
to the flash blind and the other book background. So I don't know if
Yeah.
you see that. Okay.
Rock
So
bottom.
there's the flash blind cover. So flash blind right now is more relevant than ever before, because in America, in about 3 days, a new movie called Oppenheimer is coming out with some major Hollywood stars. That's all about all about Robert Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project to
Mm.
develop the atomic bomb. Now,
Oh.
when I wrote Flashblind a few years ago, the thing that really enthralled me about it was that the same laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where they did the Manhattan Project, was the same laboratory where they decoded the human genome.
Oh.
And at the same time, so I mean, it's like, think about it. Why would you do this biologic research at the same place you're developing atomic bombs? And so I put it together and I reviewed. There are 8 volumes that were released by the Freedom of Information Act here in the United States that covered human radiation experiments. So for 50
Mm.
years, our government used a lot of us like guinea pigs and did radiation experiments without letting us know, on communities, on prisoners, on children, on pregnant women, without letting us know. And those experiments, if you read Flashblind, are the
Mm.
seed of an amazing story where the United States is trying to develop an ability for people to withstand a nuclear bomb. And so that's where it all ties together. And it's a
Mm.
medical thriller. If you liked Courage to Heal, which is more of just a straightforward medical novel, this is really a page
Mm.
turner. And it's gotten great
Oh.
reviews in the past by Kirkus and New York Times, etc. So I encourage everyone to go to Amazon and hopefully check out Flashblind, because I think you'll find it really relevant. And with all the
Oh.
buzz that's going to be around for the new Hollywood movie, Oppenheimer, hopefully people will go and want to read a book that takes Oppenheimer to the next level, by making it a story that may have been true, that I speculated on in terms of this unique relationship between the Los Alamos lab and the atomic bomb, and at the same time, the human genome. So it's kind of an interesting topic, and it's a really fun read. So I encourage everyone to go
Wow.
to Amazon and check it out.
Wow, that's quite great. I love the sound of Flashbang. It sounds very amazing. And I left a link in the description part of this interview in case we have viewers who would love to get a copy directly on Amazon. Now, Paul,
Great. Thank you. Thanks for
yeah,
doing that.
you're welcome. Now, there's a particular surgery that I found outstanding while I read through Courage to Heal, and that was a surgery on Bess Kaiser, that's Erin's wife, who was overweight, hypertensive, possible kidney failure, and has a blood clotting in the artery to her left kidney. At first, saw that the description of this particular surgery, alongside, of course, every other one, reads interestingly. I'm just curious, did this particular scenario, alongside many surgeries in the novel, entirely real?
Yeah, so most of the scenarios are real. They are based on truth. And that surgery, when I was an intern on surgery, I was able to assist at. So I knew what was involved with what's called an embolectomy, where you go in and
Mm.
remove a clot in an artery. And when the artery to your kidney is blocked, it can cause all the symptoms that Bess Kaiser had, namely the high blood pressure and the failure to do well, like she was experiencing at the time. So Sidney Garfield in the book goes in and he removes the clot, and she, gets better initially. Today, it's interesting. Today, we wouldn't do that surgery anymore because we're able to do it with interventional radiology. So we can stick a catheter, now into your arteries and remove that clot without
Mm.
having to put a
True.
very sick patient through an open procedure. And so
Mm.
we've come a long way since Bess Kaiser in the last 78 years or so. So that's where it's fun to see how surgery's evolved and how we can do things a lot
Mm.
more non-invasively now with catheters, et cetera. But that's a great question, Peter, in terms of, how the surgeries have changed. And most of
Mm.
the surgeries, et cetera, in the book are based on real surgeries at the time.
Wow. Wow, that's quite impressive to know. And it's also great to know that they've developed in terms of how to conduct the surgeries. That's amazing. Things are really changing. The world is evolving and everything is
Yeah,
evolving alongside with it. That's great to know.
exactly.
I'm really learning a lot
Exactly.
from this. Now, now, Paul, I'd love to ask you, as authors, we all have different ways of reacting to feedbacks and criticism of our works. I'm curious to know your opinion about criticism. How do you react to negative criticism of your works if you've ever had one in time past?
So I think every author has had they could wallpaper their whole house with all the negative feedbacks or rejection letters that they've gotten by either sending their book out to agents, and
Mm,
that's why I mentioned earlier, as a writer, the thing I find most helpful is read and critique. And with a read and critique group, you have to have a very thick skin and listen to everybody's opinion. Now, you never say anything, that's critical of the person. You say things that are critical of the writing and how you can improve. And that's where I think it's
absolutely.
really important, for a writer to do everything they can to get involved in a group of other writers so that
Mm,
you're making it more of a team sport. And
absolutely.
basically, it's more enjoyable because when you just give your book to your parents or your friends or your partner, it's really not, you're not going to get the feedback because they're going to be, first of all, they're not accomplished writers mostly. And at the second, they're going to say, oh, this is great. And you're going to feel good, but it's really not going to go anywhere. So I think,
Mhm.
again, I mentioned Stephen King on Writing as a great book I recommend for people to read that are writers. And he talks about all the rejections that he got, one of the greatest writers in America, got a ton of rejections before he ever got published. And so you
Wow.
need to stay the course, basically, learn from your rejections, learn from the feedback, and continuously improve. And I think that's the best message, for
Yeah,
that.
that's great. Thank you so much for that. I find it very informative and quite helpful. Thanks for your advice.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Now, I'd love to ask you, Paul, apart from Courage to Heal and Flash Blind, do you have any other works you've authored or maybe currently working on?
Yeah, so I'm going to move out of the way so you can see them,
Can
but I
see
have
that.
two other books that you can get on Amazon. Okay, the first is called, both of them are really relevant to today, even though they were written a few years ago. The
Mm,
first is Rock Bottom that you see, here.
yeah.
And Rock Bottom is all about climate change and a severe drought in California, and where the son of a Mexican farm worker who's at UC Davis and is a professor comes
Mm,
up with a way to basically save the world by reversing photosynthesis. So we all know photosynthesis is how plants produce
yeah.
energy from the sun. He
Sunlight.
was able to produce water by reversing photosynthesis. Instead of plants intaking water, they can actually produce water. So it's kind of a fun thriller. And
Wow.
along with it, there are terrorists that are trying to poison the California aqueduct, and a lot of fun
Mm,
things going on. So it's another medical thriller, but this
wow.
one is really an eco thriller. It's all about eco terrorists, and at the same time, it's about how you can help to change the environment in a positive way, and that's the message of Rock Bottom. And the other one, Rerun,
Yeah.
um, is all about physician burnout. So 50% of physicians in America today are burned out, according to different surveys. And so, how do you prevent, especially after COVID, a lot of physicians and medical personnel and nurses and first responders really got experienced burnout. And what Rerun is about a plastic surgeon whose
Mm,
family are killed in a horrible accident, who is burned out and moves to
oh,
the middle of nowhere in Arizona, in the middle of the desert, and starts repairing these old tube TVs, 1950s tube TVs. And he
mm,
becomes enthralled with old episodes of Father Knows Best. I don't know if you ever heard of Father Knows Best where you are, but it's an old episode of the 1950s and 60s
yeah.
where this perfect family, and so basically these episodes start coming true, and whether or not they're really coming true or they're only in his head, you have to read Rerun to find out. And so it's
Wow.
a story about burnout and about how to get over and survive burnout and come to the other side at the same time, experiencing some unique experiences like our main character position in Rerun. So those are the two other ones. I've written other novels, and right now I'm working on a screenplay. So I find it fun to write screenplays now. So I'm working on a screenplay. Whether or not it'll go anywhere, we'll see. But I find it fun to continually write
Yeah,
and see where we can go with that.
that's quite amazing. It's quite lovely to know these are medical thrillers, and I love the cover of Rerun. Looks quite
Oh,
beautiful
thank
to
you.
me. Yeah, that's great.
It's
Now,
it's the old TVs. The old TVs in America, when
hmm.
it was midnight, they would go off the air. And when the TVs were off the air, it wasn't like now where there's 24/7 cable, or there's things
Oh,
on 24/7 that you could stream. They used to go off the air and there'd be nothing other than these kind of, insignias, logos that you see behind me. And that's what that represents, the
yeah.
old time TVs.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I also love to ask you, is there anything that you love to share with the viewers about your books that, we couldn't mention in this interview and you'd love the viewers to know?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Peter, because I mean, as the viewers may or may not know, you're a writer yourself, and the
Yeah.
amount of time and interest that you put into these podcasts and the time, I want to thank you for all the time, you spent reviewing Courage to Heal, and your review was not only amazing, it was very thoughtful, and it really showed your ability to understand the essence, of a novel. And I
Yeah.
really appreciate,
Yeah, you're
that. And
welcome.
so, and appreciate, what you're doing right now. These podcasts are all about supporting other writers. And that's where, you know, to do anything in the writing world, you really need to get the word out there that your novel even exists. When
Yeah,
I started writing years ago, in the late 90s, um, there was no self-publishing. There was, but it was really, few. And so
yeah,
there were only about 100,000 or less novels published a year, and people went through agents, to try and get published. And
absolutely.
that was the way it was done. And then once you went through an agent, people knew your book because the publishing company would help to publicize it.
Yeah,
Nowadays, a lot of books, are self-published. And when you self-publish, there's really no way to get the word out other than, with help of you, Peter, and others that,
yeah,
have podcasts that interested readers can watch to learn about new novels that are coming out
yeah.
and learn about particular writers. So I want to thank you again for
You're
all the work that you
welcome.
do to make this come true.
Appreciate it as well.
Thanks.
That's great. That's quite great to know. And I'd love to ask you, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book like yours? What did you tell people in this category?
So it's all about staying the course and sticking together. So having a support group, like a read and critique group, I find, to be very helpful. Continuing to write every day.
Mm,
Think about what you're writing every day. So when you're not writing, think about what you're going to write. And then again, make it, instead of an individual, sitting in your house. I mean, obviously during COVID, that's what we did, other than with Zoom. But I mean, in fact, we had reading critique groups with Zoom over when we had COVID. But I think it's really important, to get a group, and they're you can find them online, people
yeah,
near you that are interested in writing, and
absolutely.
find that group and attend and really start to develop the relationships that are supportive, to you as a writer. And I think that's key. Then once you write, I do recommend trying, before you initially self-publish your book,
Yeah,
try to go the traditional way where you reach out and query agents that are interested in your type of writing. Because
yeah,
if you can get an agent, you're that much further along in terms of getting someone to read your book. Because self-publishing is
absolutely.
great
Yeah,
and all your friends will read it, but no one, will really find your book on Amazon anymore because, there's literally millions of books out there that are self-published.
absolutely.
So even though it's an amazing book, the number of times I know of two times, the author of The Martian, self-published, and then he got, his book recognized and became obviously the amazing book and movie that the movie The Martian was. And then another friend of mine, he wrote the 17-Day Diet book, self-published, and then basically it was picked up by a major publisher. So sometimes you're lucky, but if you can go the agent route, I think that's really the way to try and go, even though the publishing world is so different now because the number of publishers is less and less, and the number of agents have become less and less than they were 10 and 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's great. That's a lovely advice.
But the main thing is just keep writing.
Absolutely.
Writing is about enjoyment. So you write because you enjoy it, and you write because you have a story to tell.
Yeah.
And it's really continue to write because you enjoy telling stories.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much for your advice. I'm hopeful that viewers, including myself, would love to utilize it. So Paul, tell us, on what platform can viewers get your copy of your book, or what platform are they available on for purchase?
So thanks, Peter, for asking. I think you'll put a link. You can either go directly to the publisher, and Courage to Heal is available directly from the publisher, sunbeltpublications.com, or more easily, just go to amazon.com, and it's on amazon.com. But that was another, to your last question, I self-published Courage to Heal initially, and then it was picked up. It was recommended by someone in my writing group to a publisher who read it and said, yeah, I will publish this. And so it went mainstream. It started self-publishing, but it went to a mainstream publisher to publish it now. And that's what Sunbelt Publications, which is a small publishing house here in the San Diego area, has been publishing it now for over 15 years. And like you mentioned earlier, it now has the special 15th anniversary edition published by Sunbelt Publishing. You have the first edition, and the new 15th edition is available on Amazon or directly from sunbeltpublications.com.
Oh, that's great. That's quite lovely to know. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy directly. So thank you so much, Paul, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. It's a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks, Peter. It's been great being here, and I appreciate the opportunity again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.